prime plated round is theoretically the highest buff you can get from a primary arcane, but it comes at a cost. To determine how viable it is, we look into pros and cons and weight them against other arcanes, as well as use case scenarios, and see just where it fits. Since this is triggered on a reload and scales off of magazine size, it's blatantly obvious this will work far better on weapons with large magazines. But because buff duration is only 10 seconds, it becomes iffy. We need a lot of fire rate, and with it, something to keep our ammo economy in check, something like carrier. And full buff is only obtained on a full magazine reload. Partial reload will result in smaller buffs. But how much is enough? It's hard to say, it depends on what you're doing. Reloading like 25 rounds will give you a serration level buff of 165%. But to reach 360% bonus of other arcanes, we need to reload 112 rounds. We can't put that many into too many weapons. And to reach Chroma's Wex armor levels of damage buffs, we need to reload about 400 rounds or more, which is something only a handful of weapons can do. And then there's the question of you being able to dump that many rounds in 10 seconds. So, while theory stands, the damage buff you can get from this is the highest, this is a rather intricate arcane, for which I doubt it will be a go-to for primaries, but will definitely have its place. What comes to mind is boss fights, where we don't have common mobs, we need to trigger primary deadhead, merciless, and others. Another use case scenario is when we are not focusing on a primary weapon, because this arcane is the easiest to trigger. We have arcane dexterity that's made for melee users. This may be useful when we focus on our frame and our sidearm for the most part. Even though on low magazine size weapons like 10 to 20 shots will only get 100 to 150% damage buff, it's still more than what we can get with any other primary arcane in something like Eidolon fights, because you can't really trigger those. And with certain weapons like Kuva Com, we can get chroma level buffs on frames that don't have that, or with frames that have some multiplicative buffs on them that stack well with such high additive buff. Frames that boost fire rate will have a field day with this, as you will be able to mag dump fast enough, but you will be praying that you can sustain that kind of ammo economy. At the end of the day, I gotta be honest with you. Apart from situations where I cannot trigger primary deadhead, merciless, or dexterity, I don't think I'll be using this arcane all that much. It's awesome, it hits hard, but being almost forced to mag dump every time and having that whip behind me telling me I have to reload every 10 seconds just isn't my kind of jam. Especially when total time to kill change is not that noticeable. Combination of 360% of extra damage from any other arcane combined with galvanized overload is more than enough to melt everything. It's also counterintuitive to how I'm used to seeing the reload. I do it when I have time to spare or when I have to, and I'm not used to trying to time that just before the fight. It feels like 10-second duration is extremely rough for this arcane, and I'd like that to be revised. Maybe keep the buff for 10 seconds and let it decay over the next 10-20 seconds or something like that. I also feel like those lower end buffs for weapons with smaller magazines could be brought up just a tad. Otherwise, for common use, this is probably only viable for a couple of weapons with extremely high magazine size. I am still very glad we got something that works in different conditions, that covers those use case scenarios where other arcanes simply don't work. It's situational, and it's not just because of that, but because of high magazine size requirements, high fire rate requirements, ammo economy dumpster fire rate crates, altogether mean that we need to craft entire loadouts around it for this to work. But just because it's not a simple plug-and-play solution like Merciless, it does not make it bad, just more complicated, but very much worth it in those specific scenarios. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.